The constructor call process is very similar to a function call, but with some noticeable differences. Let's walk through this example program. LWPython first reads the person class definition. The class definition ends when Python encounters a statement whose tab is less than the current tab. At time 7, the current line is 8 and current tab is 1. The statement at line 8 is in tab 0. Since the statement tab is less than the current tab, which is 1, the person class definition has ended. LWPython then decreases the current tab to 0. At time 8, we can see the person class and the init and age and months methods in the class map. Next, Python executes the statement p equals person John Smith 25. First, Python evaluates the constructor call person John Smith 25, then assigns the result to p. LWPython begins by pushing the constructor call to the top of the expression stack. LWPython first evaluates the constructor arguments. Python is now ready to evaluate the constructor call. Python searches the function map and the class map for an entry with key person. Since person is inside the class map, Python is going to create a person class object. Python then retrieves the init method definition from the person class and prepares to construct a function input map. First, LWPS copies the input method parameters to the parameter stack. Then LWPS pops the top element from the value stack, reverses it, and assigns it to the argument value stack. And finally, LWPS assigns an empty map to function input. Next, Python starts inserting the parameters and the argument values into the function input map. But notice that parameters has 4 elements, while argument values has 3 elements. The first parameter, self, is the new person object. LWPython creates this object and appends it to the object store. As with lists and dictionaries, self becomes a Python reference, whose value is the location of the new object. Since the object store was empty, the location is 0. Python popped self from parameters, joins it with Python reference 0, and pushes this new entry into the function input map. Now Python zips the rest of the parameters with argument values and pushes them into function input. After all the parameters have been processed, Python performs 3 steps. 1. Python saves the current context in the context stack and replaces the local variables map with the function input map. 2. Python retrieves the line number from the init method definition and jumps to the method body. 3. Python records the class and the method that it is jumping to in the control map. At time 19, Python is in line 3 and tab 2, and the local variables map contains self, given name, family name, and age. Python is now inside the person's init method. In line 3, Python stores given name in self.givenName. This assignment is first converted into a setAdder function call. Python then evaluates the setAdder function call. As with any function call, Python first evaluates the function call arguments. The setAdder function is a built-in function, so Python evaluates it in one step. The top element of the value stack is John, given name, and Python reference 0. The third element is the location of the object. LWPython retrieves the element at index 0 of the object store, which is a Python object. Python then creates a new entry with attribute given name and value drawn. The setAddr function call output is just none. Python then evaluates line 4 and line 5 in the same way. Python has reached the end of the constructor body. Python can see in the control map that it was executing a class method, so it should return to the call site. The process of returning from a method is same as returning from a function. Python pops the context stack and repopulates the Python state with a popped element. Then Python jumps back to the constructor call site. One difference is that Python automatically returns self. At time 41, the current line is 8, the current tab is 0, and the return value is Python reference 0. Next, LWPython pushes the return value into the value stack. The constructor call has been evaluated. Finally, Python assigns Python reference 0 to variable p. In general, if at time t the line is I, tab is j, the expression stack is empty, and the statement at line I, tab j is x equals Python constructor with name class name and arguments args, then at time t plus 1, Python pushes the Python constructor into the expression stack and initializes the value stack. And at time t plus 2, Python pushes the constructor call arguments into the expression stack. After the arguments have been evaluated, Python initializes parameters, argument values, and function input. More precisely, if at time t the expression stack contains an empty element followed by the Python constructor, and the value stack contains evaluated, and class map is CM and the parameters is none, and method parameters where the class map is CM, the class name is class name, and the method name is init equals self and params, then at time t plus 1, the init method parameters are copied to parameters, function input is initialized to an empty map, and argument values is set to the reverse of evaluated. Python then constructs the class object and adds self and the reference to the new object to function input. More precisely, at time t plus 2, parameters is params, function input is the entry self and the Python reference to the length of the stack OS, argument values is still reverse of evaluated, and the object store is the result of appending the Python object with entry class name and class name to OS. Python then adds the rest of the parameters and argument values into function input. As a result, both the parameters and argument value stacks are empty. The function input is now the entry self, and the other entries built from the parameters and argument values. Now suppose that the class map is CM, and the line number of method init of class with class name in CM is mLine. Python can now jump to the init method body as follows. Line is mLine plus 1, tab is 2, and the expression stack is empty. Python also copies the function input into the local variables map. The control map now contains an entry 0 with pair class and the class name, and entry 1 with pair method and init. Next, let's see how LWPython updates an object's attribute. If at time t the line is I, the tab is j, and the expression stack is empty, and the statement at line I tab j is obj.attribute equals value, Python first converts this statement to setAddr, obj, attribute, and value. LWPython then evaluates this setAttr function call. At time t plus 1, line and tab are still the same, and Python pushes the setAttr function call to the expression stack. And at time t plus 2, Python pushes the function call arguments obj, attribute, and value into the expression stack. Python then evaluates the arguments and pushes them to the value stack. Next, Python updates the object attribute in the object store. More precisely, suppose that at time u, the expression stack contains an empty element followed by the setAttr function call, and the value stack contains evaluated, attribute, and Python reference IDX. The object store is OS. Also, suppose that the element at index IDX of stack OS is Python object with entries, and the result of storing evaluated at key attribute in map entries is new entries. Then at time u plus 1, Python pops the empty element as well as the function call from the expression stack and pushes none into the value stack. The object store is the result of storing Python object new entries at index IDX of stack OS. After the constructor is finished, Python stores self in return value and returns to the call site. More precisely, if at time t the line is I, the tab is 2, control map is cm, the local variables map is vm in function, and the context stack contains line, which is ci, and tab, which is cj, and the program contains some statement at line I tab k, where k is less than j, and the value at 1 in map cm is the pair method and init. Then at time t plus 1, line is ci, tab is cj, and Python has restored the constructor call into the expression stack, and the return value is the value at self in map vm in function. Finally, Python pushes the return value to the value stack. More precisely, at time t plus 2, the value stack contains value at self in map vm in function, and parameters is now none.